Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Let's get to today's daily poll, but I'm going to set it up with a news story and some sound. An inquiry hearing into Ottawa's troubled $2 billion LRT system began with pointed questions about the kind of pressures the city was putting on contractors to get the public transit project done. The line has dealt with problems since its launch in 2019. SNC Lavalin's Ricardo Constantino says budget was top of mind when the winning consortium put together its bid.
We believe that delivering the project within the budget they have available was of primary importance to the city.
Hearings are expected to run every day for 3 weeks, with the final report due before the end of August. So this is leading me into today's daily poll question. Maybe it's a little pessimistic. Maybe it's a little bit cynical. Maybe it's a little too focused on the Ottawa area. But wait. What about the LRT that has been wildly delayed, being built along Eglinton and Toronto for years? What about the LRT on the Green project that Calgary's had held up for years and years and years that people have been fighting for? What about all these expansions to public transit across the country that we know we desperately need as urban sprawl continues all over the country? So here's the cynical question. Do you find it disheartening that Canadian cities are so poor at efficiently and effectively building new public transit? Yes, no, but don't worry. I gave you an out if you want to give me a positive answer. I've also got, we build good public transit. We build good transit. So, I want to make sure that there's some room for positivity here, that my pessimism and downerness on a Tuesday, Downer Dave on a Tuesday, is not infectious. Okay, who do I go to first on this one? Let's go down the hall to Sam Robinson. Sam, I know we've talked about the importance of public transit on the show before. Do you find it disheartening that we're sometimes a little inefficient at building good public transit?
I see what you mean about the leading towards cynicism of the question too, but I agree to a certain amount. It is disheartening because the desire is there. There is expertise that, people around the world have been doing infrastructure projects and mass transit projects. It's not like we don't have somebody else to draw upon for a model. What's disheartening about it is that despite all of those things, we still can't get these things done. You mentioned the massive amount of delayed transit infrastructure projects across the country, and it always seems to boil down to, a couple of companies here too, and we mentioned one, SNC Lavalin, and also Bombardier, companies that have been propped up by successive Canadian governments as ways to sort of court votes in and around Quebec and Ontario. And that's my cynical reading of it all too, is that people have their hands in the pot at many different stages. It takes too long. Like you said, we have a sort of consultations and meetings about how we failed to have meetings. That's disheartening because it seems like it's not... Is it like something of human nature that we just can't help ourselves but steal from public coffers to as I put quotation marks around it too, but that's the whole kind of point, is that with public money is public trust, and it is constantly being betrayed. That doesn't mean that I don't think we should be giving out public trust. I think that we need to be more, have some more opportunity to, have some oversight and real
real planning.
Consequences.
Real planning and consequences.
Consequences for these things not going through. It's just meaningless unless something else happens.
Sam, I like that you identified a bit of a positive spin there that works through my cynicism. It cuts right through it, because I don't want my cynicism and Downer Dave to indicate that I don't think public transit should be a priority in this country.
Yeah.
Building better public transit should be basically the number 2 priority in this country.
Yeah.
1 should be fixing the housing crisis, and 2 should be public transit. And guess what? Those 2 things connect together as I link my fingers together. You can fix your housing crisis by building good public transit around housing, right? These are effective strategies. And yes, I do find it disheartening, but you're right. I like that you sort of identify here that, Dave,
we can't
give up. We cannot give up on building public transit. We just need to do it properly. One of the things that's going to come up in this Ottawa LRT inquiry is that they didn't test any of these trains they bought from a Brazilian company for winter. Right? They work great in Rio.
Wow.
Rio is a different city than Ottawa. It's slightly different.
Yeah.
Teensy tiny bit different. Sam, We'll talk to you a little bit later in the show. Thank you for that deep sigh.
Cheers.
Let's bring in Grace Scoffield. Grace, you have your own experiences on Toronto's public transit. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, how you got hung up one morning. But do you find it disheartening at all at our inability to build proper and efficient public transit?
Oh boy, do I have some TTC stories. If you're Downer Dave, I think that I'm going to go with Grumpy Grace.
Okay.
I feel like that's a good name for me today. I come with not a unique experience, but I've lived in two different kinds of places. I've lived in small town Northern Ontario, and now I live in a metropolitan like Toronto. And both transit systems are terrible, but for their own reasons. So I can speak to having a small town transit system that just doesn't get people where they need to go. There's entire pockets of residential areas, which is why I love that you brought up the housing crisis in the Soo, that don't have access to the buses. And the buses are the only form of public transit in Sault Ste. Marie. That's the other thing. And so they just don't have access. They can't get to a bus stop without walking a certain number of blocks. And I've known people who couldn't live in certain neighborhoods because they knew they wouldn't have access to transit. But those neighborhoods are the most affordable. So there's all of these two things really do go hand in hand. And public transit and the fact that it's not great anywhere seems to be a really big crisis for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So I do find it disheartening, but I'm also somebody who uses the TTC to get to work every day, and I don't really want the TTC karma on my side. So I love the TTC.
We did this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about what's our biggest technology frustration, then all our technology gave up on us all day.
Exactly.
So you know what?
Yeah.
Let's
I faced a line 2 delay this morning. I don't need another one.
I'm likely taking the TTC to go see a movie today. So I also, no, that's less urgent than going to work, but I needed to work as well for me. I would prefer the TTC works properly for me today. Let's bring in Mike Ross for his thoughts on this. Mike, do you ever find it disheartening to see how inefficient we are at building proper public transit in Canadian cities?
Well, let me make a left turn here, Dave, because I've recently experienced just how inept I think a lot of city designers or planners or constructors or designers are at all kinds of things. It almost seems like you're left wondering who's actually running these departments. So the youth baseball team that I coach, we were playing at a field in Whitby, Ontario the other night, and the way they've laid out this field, the sun sets behind third base. The problem with that is that most plays in a game happen at first base, which looks across at third. If the sun is setting behind third base and those balls are flying over from the third base side to first base, the first baseman can't see the ball because the sun is completely in his face. Everybody knows you do not set a baseball diamond up with the sun setting behind third base, and yet here we were. And it got me kind of thinking, if we can't even get the layout of a baseball diamond, which in many instances is a square, if you can't figure out how to lay down the square properly, then how are you going to figure out transit? In fact, this morning, reading on the Globe and Mail today, one of the articles mentioned the fact that the LRT on Eglinton Avenue in Toronto has now been going on for a decade.
Yeah.
A decade. It's just shocking to me. And I will say, I'm going to finish on this, Dave, and I hope Karen McGee is listening right now, because I believe it was 2019. I was in Ottawa. We were doing a quick test of the AMI studios in Ottawa. And I made a joke because there was this whole big hoopla about how the next day was going to be the grand opening of the LRT. And I said to Karen, well, no, it's not really, because it's going to be shut down probably like the next day or the day after that. And she like totally was just poo-pooed that whole thing and like, oh, you're such a pessimist. Get over yourself. It's going to be great. And what happened? So I just want to say, Karen, I don't like saying actually with Karen, I love saying I told you so. So I told you so, Karen. And unfortunately, we've got our own problems here in Toronto, but that just seems to be the way it goes, Dave. We can't seem to get it right in many parts of this country.
That Eglinton LRT, don't get me wrong, once that thing gets up and running and providing it stays up and running,
Yeah.
hopefully they tested those cars for winter conditions. You never know with Canadian cities. That's going to be a huge addition to the public transit in this city. More east-west transit from a more northern perspective makes a ton of sense. So again, I want to make sure that I'm not poo-pooing the concept of investment in public transit here.
Absolutely.
Especially because as we're talking about the potential of having people driving less or using less gas, or people experiencing the surge of these gas prices, you can't ask people to use public transit if your system stinks, right? If you can't get people where they need to go, they're not going to use it. People are not going to come in from the suburbs if the drive is 25 minutes and the public transit is 2.5 hours. It's not reasonable to ask people to do that. So as Grace identified, there are a number of different factors and a number of different reasons as to why you want good public transit in your cities. And I know that's kind of a Captain Obvious statement, but there's so many intersecting components that can improve the life for people, can improve the cost of living crisis, and can improve climate change. All these things intersect. So we need to be really cognizant and focused on starting to do this right. And Meagan, give me 30 seconds on our daily poll. Do you find it disheartening that it seems Canadian cities are so bad at building effective public transit?
Yes, but I'm so used to the fact that they're bad at it that I'm completely desensitized, and I don't even know if I have an emotion anymore.
Okay. When I was in Brantford a couple of weeks ago, I'm moderating a discussion with provincial politician hopefuls for the Ontario provincial election. One of the politicians told a story about how she would go to university in Waterloo, but would have to take the bus to Mississauga to get to Waterloo from Brantford, even though Brantford was just south of Windsor. Not Windsor, but Waterloo.
Waterloo. Yeah, it totally doesn't make any sense. Brantford just got a Go Bus service a few years ago, and people would not believe me for years when I would say, oh, I take Via Rail from Toronto to Brantford. It's like an hour trip. And they're like, can't you take Go Transit? And I'm like, no, because it doesn't exist. I would just like to put a plug for my hometown there. Brantford is literally in the middle of everywhere and is barely connected to those transit systems. And we just don't understand. I understand why you don't want to stay in the city forever as a tourism destination, but we would like to be able to travel.
Yeah, seems reasonable to me. Hey, Meagan, thank you for this.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.